Welcome to the next chapter of our Wisdom for Life series. This week we're looking at wealth. And earlier in the year, I did something in Penrith Baptist Church where we talked about 4 spiritual principles regarding money and wealth. And I'm going to actually use those spiritual principles that we sort of picked out from the scriptures and put together. I'm going to use those same principles again and just see what the book of Proverbs speaks into them. And see, these principles are built from all different parts of the Bible, but Proverbs has actually got some things to say, particularly to a number of them. There's some that doesn't speak into as heavily, but let's look at what Proverbs says on how to be wise with our money in the context of these principles. Now, to remind you of these principles, the first one was simplicity, and simplicity is a spiritual principle applied to spending. The second was stewardship, and the stewardship is a spiritual principle applied to ownership. The third one is setting aside, and it's the spiritual principle applied to saving. And sacrifice is the fourth spiritual principle, and that's a spiritual principle applied to giving. All right, well, let's get right into it. And the first one that we're going to look at is simplicity. Simplicity, the spiritual principle applied to spending. Now, Proverbs talks about wise spending, or there's two things in Proverbs that actually enhances our understanding of simplicity. And these two things are two very simple things. One is contentment and the other is perspective. The first one is contentment. Let me share with you a few scriptures that speak into the spiritual principle of simplicity expressing itself in contentment. Proverbs 30 verses 8 and 9 says, "First, help me never to tell a lie. Second, give me neither poverty nor riches. Give me just enough to satisfy my needs. For if I grow rich, I may deny you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' And if I am too poor, I may steal and thus insult God's holy name." This is about being content. These words are about being content, about God's will for our life financially. I want you to think through, it's a bit of an illustration. I want you to think through, have you ever considered whether you're good at being rich or good at being poor? Now, it's a funny question to ask because we assume none of us will be good at being poor. And yet some of us have chosen in life to have a very simple life or live at a particular baseline. We think of Mother Teresa. It was a decision to actually live amongst the poor and be amongst the poor, and she lived really well that way. In fact, made massive difference in the world. Some of us are called to be wealthy and rich, and we live really well in that way, and we're quite generous. But what we've got in Proverbs is saying when we live rich, let's live well. When we live poor, let's live well. Let's make sure that we're content with God's calling on our lives. There's another Proverb says in chapter 16, verse 8, it says this, "Better to have little with godliness than to be rich and dishonest." Again, this is about being content. It's about going, okay, my character is more important than what I consume. And I do like the phrase, better to have a little and be godly than to be rich and dishonest. And sometimes wealth actually corrupts us if we don't handle it well. This is not saying don't be rich. It's just saying make sure it's character and godliness first. Again, it says this in Proverbs chapter 22. "Choose a good reputation over great riches. Being held in high esteem is better than silver or gold. The rich and poor have this in common. The Lord made them both." This is about being content, or the simple life, the simple wise life of being content with who we are, how we're created, what we have, and that our reputation comes ahead of what we consume, or even particularly the pursuit of what we don't have. Another aspect of this contentment, or this simplicity and contentment, is whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. The wise, chapter 21, verse 20 says, "The wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get." When I think of simplicity, there's some spiritual disciplines that often go beside that for me. And one of them is fasting. Fasting, often we see in Daniel, for instance, there's a fasting from luxuries. So the choosing of simplicity is often worked itself out with other spiritual disciplines like fasting, which is all about actually saying, I'm not going to pursue constant pleasure fixes, which is what those scriptures have just said. I'm going to choose a simple life that is satisfied with the simplicity of following God. And I'm not going to be foolish enough to think that the more I have, the more I consume, the happier I'll be. And so fasting for me is often a very powerful spiritual discipline, which I approach to simplicity. Now, when we said there's a couple of things that Proverbs enhances in our understanding of simplicity, the second one is perspective. Proverbs 23 verses 4 and 5 says, "Don't wear yourself out trying to be rich. Be wise enough when to quit. In the blink of an eye, wealth disappears, for it will sprout wings and fly away like an eagle." What I like about this, it reminds me of Matthew chapter 6, where it says, or it talks about moth and rust will consume what we build. So let's not be foolish and actually think that our possessions and the things that we build last are eternal. In Matthew, Jesus actually says, they will fade away. They will fade away. In 1 Timothy, it says those that love money or wear themselves out trying to be rich, as Proverbs said, will plunge themselves into ruin and destruction. The principle of simplicity, when we actually choose the simple things in life, particularly with our spending, will actually strengthen us to a life of contentment, a life of perspective, and I think will help us pursue our godliness. Now, that's not saying that money is bad, because you may be really great with money. You may make heaps of money. John Wesley said once, "Earn all you can, save all you can, so you can give all you can." And that's probably something for us to think through. If we've been blessed with much, we need to actually be generous with what we have. Now, I'll come back to that when we look at the spiritual discipline of sacrifice, which is actually the one applied to our giving. The second spiritual principle is the spiritual principle of stewardship, which is applied to our ownership. I'm just going to read to you one proverb, just a straight out problem about wisdom with money as far as I look at it. Wisdom with money is God first. Proverbs 11:28. "Trust in your money and down you go, but the godly flourish like leaves in spring." Trust in your money and down you go, but the godly flourish like leaves in spring. So then what do we do with our money? Well, that's where stewardship comes in. It's actually realizing that we don't own anything. We are merely stewards on this planet of all that God has given us. Whatever lot in life He's given us, we are stewards. Now, one of the things about what Proverbs speaks into stewardship, it says 4 key things. First is this: wise stewards aren't lazy. I'm going to rattle through some scriptures now. They're just going to keep coming up on the screen, and you will see Proverbs speaks a lot about being lazy. You ready? Here they go. Lazy people are soon poor. Hard workers get rich. Proverbs 10. A lazy person is as bad as someone who destroys things. Lazy people sleep soundly, but idleness leaves them hungry. I walked by the field of a lazy person, the vineyard of one with no common sense. I saw that it was overgrown with nettles. It was covered with weeds. Its walls were broken down. Then as I looked and thought about it, I learned this lesson. A little extra sleep, a little more slumber, and little folding of the hands to rest, then poverty will pounce on you like a bandit. Scarcity will attack you like an armed robber. Work brings profit, but mere talk leads to poverty. Basically, wise stewards, wisdom for life is don't be lazy. Laziness will lead us, it says, to poverty. And here's the thing what I like. Work brings profit, it said, but mere talk leads to poverty. Work, let's understand that work is good stewardship. Work is not evil. Sometimes we feel like it. Oh, Monday. Work is a good thing. It was there in the beginning. It was there with Adam in Genesis chapter 2. Hadn't even experienced the fall. In the communion with God, work was part of it. He worked the ground, it says in Genesis chapter 2. Work is good. Productivity is good. We know it actually helps with our mental health. But as a good steward, we are not lazy. We work. And we work with the gifts, the talents, the abilities, the resources that God has given us. So wise stewards aren't lazy. The other thing that wise stewards do is they don't cheat. Let me rattle through some stuff. It's interesting. Laziness is big. Cheating is big. Let me have a read. Don't cheat your neighbour by moving the ancient boundary markers. Don't take the land of defenceless orphans. In other words, don't create more income by cheating others. Stolen bread tastes sweet, but it turns to gravel in the mouth. The Lord detests double standards. He is not pleased by dishonest scales. The Lord detests the use of dishonest scales. But he delights in accurate weights. Riches won't help on the day of judgment, but right living can save you from death. A person who gets ahead by oppressing the poor or by showering gifts on the rich will end in poverty. But don't rob the poor just because you can, or exploit the needy in court, for the Lord is their defender. He will ruin anyone who ruins them. Now there's a warning. Evil people get rich for the moment, but the reward of the godly will last. So as a wise steward, we don't cheat God by taking his resources and use them for our own consumption and our own gain, but we don't cheat others. Wise stewards take what we have and we work hard, we're not lazy, and we don't cheat others. And cheating others is not just about oppressing others. We don't cheat others in the workplace. We don't work to others' demise to get our advancement. So wisdom and wealth is more than just what do I do with my money. It's actually about how do I live my life. The other thing we read in Proverbs is wise stewards don't gamble. And you might go, gamble? What does it say anything about that? Check this out. A hard worker has plenty of food, but a person who chases fantasies ends up in poverty. The trustworthy person will get a rich reward, but a person who wants quick riches will get into trouble. Greedy people try to get rich quick, but don't realize they're headed for poverty. And then in Proverbs 13, wealth from get-rich-quick schemes quickly disappear. Wealth from hard work grows over time. I think we're all tempted by the quick buck. I think we're all tempted by it. And I'm not even just talking about gambling. I'm talking about as far as sports bet or whatever that is. I'm actually talking about, we're looking for the edge to make money quickly. And here we've got this ethic of being stewards with what we have. Now, the parable of the talents tells us to invest what we have, invest wisely. So be good stewards, grow what God's given us, especially for the blessing of others. That's its purpose. But there's something tied into working hard, of not being lazy. There's something tied into not cheating others. There's something about offering the get-rich-quick schemes are often done at others' expense. Gambling, there's a lot of people that go broke with gambling institutions for the benefit of others that go well. So, wise stewards don't go for quick rich schemes. The other thing about wise stewards is they know their finances. Proverbs 27:23. Know the state of your flocks and put your heart into caring for your herds. I'm just going to put up to you one of the things that I like about doing these messages is that here's a basic budget which will help you know the state of your herds. Now that sounds pretty funny, but the state of your spending. I like to suggest that 10% of our income is setting aside. It's that setting aside principle. It's that saving for the rainy days to empower our callings. And we've talked about this before in other times. 10% of our income is we give it away. It's our spiritual discipline of sacrifice. We bless others. 40% of our income we use to repay good debt or housing. And the interesting thing is, if we don't have that sort of debt and we still have a significant income, why turn that 40 into 80% on spending? Why not increase our setting aside? Why not increase our giving? And the last one is 40% of income is dedicated to spending. And if we have a spiritual discipline of simplicity, we'll actually do that well. That's something practical. I know you'll be ticking in your own mind, what does my finances look like? That's just a practical stewardship tool. The third spiritual discipline is setting aside. Setting aside is a spiritual principle. The setting aside is a spiritual principle applied to savings. Proverbs has a little to say on setting aside, but that spiritual principle is picked up in other parts of the Bible much more comprehensively, like in the stories of Joseph and often in parables. But there are a couple of quick things that we see in setting aside that Proverbs says. It said, those too lazy to plough in the right season will have no food at the harvest. In other words, that means do work in the right season, set it aside, and then consume it in the right time. In other words, understand the seasons and use saving as a principle in that. Another one, the earnings of the godly enhance their lives, but evil people squander their money on sin. The whole thing about setting aside, my wife loves this phrase. She says, delayed gratification. Setting aside is a principle which will help us embrace delayed gratification instead of instant gratification. A fool consumes all they have, the Bible says. A fool consumes all they have. Okay, not a lot more to say on setting aside in Proverbs. The final one is sacrifice. Sacrifice is the spiritual principle applied to giving. Proverbs strengthens our passion for giving by highlighting a number of things. In Proverbs, giving is about faith. Check these out. Greed causes fighting. Trusting the Lord leads to poverty. So it's about faith and trusting God. Or better to have little with fear of the Lord than to have great treasure and inner turmoil. So in Proverbs, what we're saying is that giving, that spiritual discipline of sacrifice, is actually an act of faith. It's trusting God. When we give away, you'll hear testimony after testimony. If we're faithful with our giving to God, faithful with our giving to others, and what we've learned today about faithful about giving to the poor, and we'll come to that in a moment, what we find is God will be faithful. So the spiritual discipline of sacrifice, Proverbs says it builds our faith. In Proverbs, giving is also about generosity. Give freely and become more wealthy. Be stingy and lose everything. The generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. Again, this is a principle in life, but it's actually it's a godly principle. God's the one who will refresh us. Okay, if we are generous. The Bible talks so much about generosity. Does our sacrifice have an element of generosity to it? Does it have an element of faith to it? Does it have an element of meeting needs? That's the third thing that Proverbs says about giving. In Proverbs, giving is about meeting needs. Blessed are those who are generous because they feed the poor. If you help the poor, you are lending to the Lord. He will repay you. Those who strut their ears to the cries of the poor will be ignored in their own time of need. Whoever gives to the poor will lack nothing, but those who close their eyes to poverty will be cursed. Every year when Christmas comes around, we have an opportunity in our giving to give beyond ourselves. Now, we can give to our family, we can give presents, we can give gifts, all those sorts of things, but there will be spots everywhere where we can give to the poor out of what we have, where we can actually sacrifice for the well-being of others, for the blessing of others, where we can give in faith, where we can give generously, where we can meet the needs. In Penrith Baptist Church, every year we come around to Angel Tree. Angel Tree is where we go and buy presents for those kids whose parents are incarcerated. And the present, interestingly enough, doesn't come from us. So it's this completely anonymous thing. It's not anonymous. The present actually comes from an incarcerated parent to a child that's probably struggling to have gifts that year. So we go out and we buy the presents. We don't get to write our name on it. We don't get to write Penrith Baptist on it or anything like that. We just simply step in and meet the needs of the poor, of the hurting, of the broken, in, I imagine, a really difficult time. And there are many other opportunities. So to recapture the sacrifice is the spiritual principle applied to giving. In Proverbs, it enhances that spiritual principle as it brings to light faith, generosity, meeting needs. Thanks for listening today. We've gone through the 4 spiritual principles. We can talk about them from all other aspects of Scripture, but I did want to stay faithful to what Proverbs has to contribute to it today. But I would love to come back to the words of Jesus to finish. The words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount on wealth and money were these: for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Matthew chapter 6. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And then when he finishes the Sermon on the Mount, and we've talked about this already, he says, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. So, what did he say? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And those that hold on to that and have a heart for God and seek first his kingdom and live out these proverbs that we've done today will be wise. They will have gained wisdom for life with their wealth, and will be building our house on a rock, and it will not be shaken. Money can fleet away, it said in one of the Proverbs. But we can trust God to take care of our needs, and we can trust God to get to work through us as vessels of blessing to others. Hope you enjoyed today's Wisdom for Life, focusing on wealth. Let me pray. Lord, I pray that we would be faithful with what you've given us. I pray that we would live simply and not live for spending and consuming. I pray that we would live wisely in our stewardship, recognizing all we have is from you. I pray that we would live sacrificially, and we would give to others, and we'd think more highly of others than ourselves. And I pray that we would also live with that principle of setting aside, where we wouldn't be foolish and consume all we have, but we would set aside for the storms of life, for the challenges that come, and for the opportunities that you place before us to live out the calling that we have. Lord, I pray for all those that are watching this. I pray for your provision in their lives. I love the Lord's Prayer. Give us all our daily bread. Give us all our daily bread. And I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.